Right, so welcome, everybody. What a joy it is to be here. Bloody technology.
Technology.
To be fair, it could be argued that I'm a bit of a Luddite, aren't I, darling? Yes, I am a little bit of a Luddite. A little bit of a Luddite. A little bit.
But you're trying.
I am trying.
And I think she's just, oh, there we go.
So if I could just get started on this really, to say that this is the second of the podcasts for New Gen Care, the state of care for our Black elders. During the first one, we actually spent time talking about, and when I say we, it was Vanessa and I, my business partner. We actually spent time talking about why we'd actually set up the company, what we've been doing so far, the motivation and all of those sorts of things. And we actually thought it was a good next step to actually talk to somebody who's directly impacted by all of this, namely my daughter, Panama Donaldson, at the other end of this conversation. So I suppose to start off with, Panama, perhaps you just want to tell people about, apart from being my daughter, who you are and how this all kinds of impacts on you. And just remember, actually, before we go any further, we have an hour. I know you and I can actually talk for hours on end between us. We win world records, but we do have an hour, so we'll try and stick to an hour.
Absolutely. Well, so obviously I'm Panama Donaldson. I, by trade, am a dietitian. I've also studied agroecology and food security at Coventry University, and I'm currently undergoing a programming course to become a full stack developer now. So a bit of a career change in the middle of 2020, which I think is pretty much everyone at the moment. I've also recently become a mum of 3. So I have one of my little companions with me right now, baby Joe. So thanks, Ben, for policing us. Obviously one of the big things growing up was I grew up in Rugby, surrounded by elders. So, all living in very, very close proximity to one another. Thanks, Belinda. But now, as I've grown up, obviously they've got older too. And I've seen their additional needs increase, and also seeing some needs not being met, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. So it's something that has become acutely focused, I would say probably since about March, that there's a distinct difference between say, for example, my friends' white grandparents and their experiences of food packages and Meals on Wheels, to the experiences of the elders within my community as well, and the care they receive. So yeah, it's impacted me quite a lot, particularly during the pandemic.
Okay, well, that's kind of giving people a little bit of a background on you. I will fill in some gaps for them.
Oh God.
Which is why Vanessa's actually on here to police things, because Panama is my child, and she tends to say things that sometimes can be a little bit politically incorrect. And those of you who know me, I'm a bit like that too. So there might be some things on here that people are going, oh my word, did she really say that? Yes, she did. She probably did. And quite rightly too. Now, in terms of moving on, Panama, you and I have had many conversations as you've grown up about me getting old. Because obviously, as an only child and as a single parent, you kind of dependent on, or certainly were dependent on me. So we have kind of had conversations about me getting old. And as I've kind of moved on now, I am getting old. What are your thoughts now? What are the things that concern you as, the time ticks and, there's a potential of you maybe having to organise care for me or take care of me or what have you? What are your general thoughts around all of that?
Well, it kind of flows into three different avenues. Obviously, the first thing is, well, what are our options? You know?
Mm,
So if you do need get older, well, you're definitely going to get older, but if you do need more support when you get older and all those kinds of things, the major question then becomes, what are our options? You know, do you go to a home? Do you get live-in support? Do you come and live with us? Because, you know, culturally, a lot of other cultures have their parents come and live with them
mm,
um, once they get to a certain point. So that kind of thing is on my mind, but also the idea of identity, because you've been a person who, how can I say, is very independent all your life.
yeah.
The idea of you coming to live with us
Mm,
or being in a restrictive care home
mm,
just isn't going to work. And then aside from that, you've got to deal with things like, well, what food is available within the home? If it's
mm,
not what I want to eat, minan nyamit. Um, but but the other thing that goes hand in hand is, you know, there's a certain element where you have to give up some of your own power, some of your own dignity,
mm,
when it comes to needing support in homes.
mm,
And so, how are you going to feel about that if it's some young man who's doing it in a care home where they actually aren't that bothered? I mean, I remember, I think it was last year or the year before, where we had the care home scandal,
mm.
where I think it was Panorama even,
Right,
um, did a documentary on care homes. And a lot of the families were complaining that they couldn't understand why some of their elders were getting bruises or why they were losing weight, and all this kind of stuff. And it actually transpires that the people within the care homes weren't doing the care they were supposed to be.
mm,
And, you know, you're kind of at the mercies of someone else.
mm,
So for me, the big thing is, okay, well, my mum needs additional support. Who can I trust?
yeah.
Who will understand my mum's needs, not just to be clothed, to be fed, to be washed, you know, but to eat what you want to eat. You know, you've lived all your life.
Mm,
The idea that you would suddenly have to change everything to accommodate that
mm,
is actually quite upsetting more than anything else. You don't work hard all your life to then be told to shut up and eat rice pudding, you know? Um,
no.
so, you know, I want you to have that avenue and to be able to enjoy, you know, your retirement and your dotage. You know, it's the time where you have a lot of time to dispel wisdom and, you know, dispense time on these little people.
Mm,
Um, and I'd love for you to be able to, you know, enjoy that,
mm,
rather than kind of go into yourself. Because even when I used to work on the hospital wards, one of the big problems on the elderly wards was the tendency for them to really go into themselves
mm,
if they're on there for too long, or, you
mm,
know, if they were just left on a pad and then they couldn't get to the toilet by themselves, you know.
yeah.
So those are all the kind of things I think about. You know, is it safe? Are you going to feel like yourself in
Mm,
there? Are you going to be supported in a way that you need, but also gives you the freedom to continue to do the things that you're able to do? Because you don't want those skills to diminish any quicker than, you know, they already would.
mm,
And the social element as well, you know. I remember I was working for a charity in London, and I was speaking to a supporter, and she was moving away from where she'd been all her life, but because her son wanted to take her with him because he didn't trust anyone.
mm,
But what that meant was she was uprooting everything
mm,
she'd ever known.
mm,
And she was really, really hesitant about it.
mm,
And so it's things like that. How close are you to a social setting? Is in your new place where you're going, is there any opportunities to socialize with people who are like you?
absolutely.
And so those are the things that I really, really have to be very mindful and considerate about when I think about, should you get to this point? Because, in some cases, as much as families would love for their elders to stay with them, they just can't give them the kind of care that they need. So their options become increasingly limited.
Yeah.
And so those are really the things that I kind of think about.
So I know that you laughingly said that when I get older, you're going to put me in the attic or you're going to put me down in the cellar, whichever one.
Well, what I actually said was, I'm going to put you in the attic, and if your brother or any of them want to come get you, if they take you out, they got to take you with them. That's what I said.
Yes, I do remember that very clearly, actually, Panama. And arguably, that could have been a motivation for actually setting up New Gen Care, to be fair. It's like, I don't really have to be in that situation.
I am not saying anything, but we have puddings on special order.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just in terms of your thought process, because I know that you and I actually spoke about setting up the company a long time before we actually did anything. What you thought, because obviously me deciding to do that is going to impact on you in all sorts of ways. In terms of setting up New Gen, what was your initial, your honest initial reaction to my plans as they were?
Well, I suppose it was a natural progression. You've always been this way inclined, which is save the universe, starting with the elderly. But it was a natural progression. It was something that is so needed in our community, and even in the chat, Auntie Lorraine said, this is what they worry about, even in the States. So it's one of those things where it was something you had to do. You'd had it in your mind and in your heart for a long time. But equally, I know that these are your retiring years. And so you're actually dedicating your old age to supporting other people who are more vulnerable than yourself, which is great. It's wonderful. I obviously have concerns about how much rest you get, that you're not going to burn out, that you're going to be supported. Are there people that understand what you're trying to do? Because for a lot of other communities, this isn't even a thought.
Yeah.
So if you're a white older lady, yes, you'll have your general apprehensions about going into care, but you don't have to worry about, is there going to be food you like? Are they going to know how to do your hair, or are they going to shave your head? Which is a real story we've heard, You're not going to think about, oh no, are they going to know how to grease my skin? Oh, do I want someone touching me like that when they cream my skin? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I understand why you would do it. I understand the need for it. Yes, I have my concerns in terms of your balance. Thanks, Adrian. Mature. He's telling me to use mature instead of all. Thanks, Adrian. But that's what's on my mind, is that you have the right balance, that you have the right support, that people catch your vision and understand it. So actually having to explain, these are the additional needs that people like myself have, explaining to even other communities, sometimes our families can't care for us, or sometimes we just don't want to go and live where they live. A lot of my generation have moved overseas or are studying overseas.
Yeah.
So, or even just in other parts of the country, and their parents may not want to leave with them. Even things like, I remember we had this conversation before actually, and it's just come to mind, is, are older couples going to be able to stay together?
Yeah.
Because if one has more needs than the other, one may have to go into the home, but the same home may not accept the other one.
Yeah.
So some people, for the first time in exactly for the first time in 50-60 years, some couples will have separated, and not of their own choice or of their own doing either. And so I'm so aware of the need for it. I'm so aware that other cultures, there's gonna have to be a conversation and explanation about it. because they're not going to understand, whether it's the case of, you know, they live in a multi-generational household, that's just always the way it's been, and there's always someone at home with the elders to take care of them. They may not understand the barriers that we additionally have to consider. So yeah. Oh, Angela says she will look after you.
Oh, fair play. Thanks, Ange. I'll hold you to that, or rather Panama will hold you to that.
I will hold you to that. Remember, if you take her, you must keep him.
Yeah. Another, I mean, part of all of that, really and truly, in terms of taking care of your old people, and, you know, I'm kind of blessed in terms of still being very healthy, touch wood.
Praise God.
But the point is that for a lot of the elders, the scenario of them not being physically well, because as you know, and I do, there are a lot of widows in the community that they are left in the house on their own because husbands have died. And as you were saying about kids moving away, you know, even in our extended family, you know, everybody's kind of moved to different countries and all sorts of different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're left in a house where they're actually trying to cope with things, and particularly now during this pandemic, being alone and not necessarily having the opportunity to have conversations, there's a potential for the sort of mental faculty to kind of deteriorate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
From your perspective, do you worry about my mental capacity and getting things like, you know, living attorney sort of, so you've got the right, if you like, to kind of make decisions on my behalf and that kind of thing, or even, you know, you saying, well, do you know what, I want this house to be mine in terms of my inheritance. My mum's worked really hard and la la la, and I want to make sure that you know, I get this house once she passes away. You know, all of those sorts of things. Do you think about those things, and what do you think?
That's actually really deep. If I'm honest, I know we've had conversations about these things before, and, you know, it's not something I like to think about, but it is something you have to contemplate for the future to some level.
Yeah.
I think with the wonders of technology, you know, we can kind of stem the demise of, you know, people's intellect and mind, because, you know, you've got stimulation there without leaving the house, especially when you're in quarantine or you're considered a vulnerable person, right? But I do think, you know, particularly we as a culture need to be directed and be able to have the open, honest questions of what if.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's my contingency? So for many years, you know, traditionally what we did was children would keep in touch with the neighbors' children who haven't left the country or who still live down the road, and when they go and see their mom, they just ask, oh, can you just pop in and make sure my mom's got everything she needs? That's kind of been the traditional thing, right? But as we've moved further and further away in terms of now everybody's gone, like if you're from the north or the Midlands, no doubt you're either going to relocate to Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, or London, which means you're well away from home for the most part. And so having a facility where there is the support there, so to help identify, you know, is my mum deteriorating? Because a lot of the time you don't know. You know, our elders are very, very good at masking things. How many times have I said to my nan, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Come to find she's got, you know, chest infection. In fact, you've done that to me before as well. So, you know, we're incredibly good at not wanting to burden our children.
Yes.
And our grandchildren.
Yeah.
But you definitely need to have that conversation about, well, mum, what would you like me to do in this case?
Mm,
Where do you want to live?
mm,
You know, um, what happens to your house and where you want to live may drastically impact any decisions you make, you know. So if
mm,
mum wants to stay at home,
mm,
then getting in-home care means obviously, you know, significant costs unless you know, your places are funded and all those kinds of things. But equally, if it's decided you're not safe to be at home, we've got to make that decision about, okay, well, where's best? You know, is it supported living? You know,
yeah,
those really nice complexes, which means for a lot of people, you're going to have to talk about selling the house
yeah,
to go and buy those complexes.
yeah,
But I certainly think for us as a community, we need a hub where we can have those conversations and discuss options.
mm,
Because we don't like to talk about death. For our community, we feel like talking about death means you're ushering it in. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
So we don't tend to talk about this. We don't tend to talk about wills either, which is something that's so important,
yeah,
especially with people moving overseas or somewhere else now.
mm,
Um, and yeah, it's something we need to have the conversation about. I'm acutely aware that I'm blessed that I'm still very close to you in
mm,
terms of distance, so I can do welfare checks quite regularly on you, or
yeah,
I can just throw your granddaughter at you. If you catch her, you're fine. If you miss him,
problem,
we
problem.
we we, we need to get you to the GP toot sweet.
Yeah,
So, you know, that's kind of my thoughts on it. We need to have the discussion. We need to not be afraid of having the discussion, and we need to know what our options are.
yeah,
Because if you don't know, you're liable to make an uninformed decision, which within our community is detrimental on
mm,
every level.
mm, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I suppose uh, until I actually started doing the work that we're doing at New Gen, and going out and talking to lots of people and reading the many reports and all of that kind of stuff, I wasn't as aware as I am now about the lack of information, shall we say, about what is available, and how people
Mm,
can actually um, get information and access, you know, facts, as opposed to, you know, urban myths about how do you take care of X and how do you take care of Y. um
mm,
and you know, one of the things that is, and certainly for us, was, if you wanted to find some kind of care for me, be that domiciliary care or residential care, and I know that you're a go to Google girl because you ask Google everything, is if you went to Google and said, I want somewhere, I'm looking for somewhere to take care of my mum, Black Elder, there's very little really in terms of
absolutely,
information that would come up, because
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, we found that there are a number of organizations out there who share our concerns and our passion for our community. But if it wasn't for the fact that we are talking to other people who are pointing us in all the various directions, we wouldn't know about these things as a general, if we ask Google all of that kind of information. And given that you
Mhm.
are a Google girl, if you did want to find out about something to take care of me, I mean, where would you go? How would you actually go about doing all of that kind of thing?
Well, I see, and this is the problem. Because if you go the institutional route, which
Yeah,
is you go into, so you ask social workers or you ask the local authorities or all that kind of stuff,
yeah,
or even if you go to private companies,
mm,
there are certain things that they will not tell you and
mm,
you don't know until you get there, and that is terrifying.
mm,
So, you know, I can speak to a social worker and they can recommend a home, and then you get there and there's no one that looks like us,
mm,
either reflected in the staff
mm,
or the clients themselves.
mm,
And that's scary, particularly for me. The same as if you were sending your child to a school. If
yeah,
there was no staff that did not look like them, you know your child is therefore vulnerable because there's no one that understands them.
yeah,
So I'll give a perfect example. One of my friends has become a social worker,
mm,
and she was on a case as a student, and praise God she was where she was, because one of the clients, who I think at this point had become non-verbal, was just wailing and moaning and crying because she found out that one of her elders had passed away. And the social worker that was actually managing the case was saying, oh, you know, her mental health significantly deteriorated. We may have to have her committed. And it was only because this person was of the same descent, you know, Nigerian descent, that she was able to say, no, 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 this is just the way we mourn. Okay, this is normal for us. It's part of our culture. It's just what happens. It'll happen for the next week or so, and then we'll move on. She'll be fine. She's not deteriorating. She doesn't need to be committed. But if it's not for people who understand that, then that would have had an exceedingly different outcome. And it's the same with the elders, and it's the same with our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you're aware of how hard I've been working for the Caricom project.
Absolutely.
Running around and doing X and Y. What is
Yep.
your view on the fact that I needed, or I, when I say I, that's New Gen and our partner the Grills, what's your view on the fact that we actually had to create that service in 2020 for our elders in order to make sure that they were actually getting a healthy diet? Because as you know, because I've been ranting forever, but in terms of being a young person and the child of somebody who's been here for however many years, how does that make you feel? What do you feel about and think about all of that in terms of the state of care for our people?
So with my clinical head on, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised it was an unavailable service. With my as a personal thing, as a human being, as a person, it's devastating. Because the thing we often forget is we think of food as fuel, you know, it's just something to keep us going. We'll pick up what we want throughout the day, but we don't understand what an integral part food plays in cultures. Perfect example is right now, the rest of the year you will not see Christmas pudding, mince pies, big turkey, you know, and all the other stuff we see at Christmas time. Why? Because it's a cultural thing that when we celebrate Christmas, this is what we eat. The same thing as within West Indian communities. When Easter comes, what do we eat? Fish. Why? That's just what we do. And if you don't understand the significance of that, then actually what you start doing is you start whittling away at who somebody is.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, what you have is you have a group of people who are being given food that they don't recognize. And we as human beings, when we don't recognize something as a food, we don't eat it for safety purposes, to keep ourselves alive. And so what you end up then with is you end up with people who are malnourished, and in the case of the pandemic, are unable to get the food themselves, either because all the delivery slots have been taken, or they're not able to leave the house, or, you know, they're self-isolating because they're a very vulnerable person. You know, you have that issue. But also on the other end of it, you get food wastage.
Yeah.
How many old people do I know that have got food parcels in the past that have said, you know, do you eat this? I don't eat it. Can you take it with you? I don't want it to go to waste. Right? And so it's a big thing. It's a lot bigger than I think we give it credit for when we talk about food as part of someone's identity. You know, I heard countless stories of people who, when they came from the West Indies, they were spending huge amounts of money on food they recognized, but was very expensive because it was imported, because they didn't recognize the stuff that was available in the UK. And it was only over time, as they had to become more shrewd with money, that they started maybe experimenting with the food that was available to them. And in some ways, you know, let's be honest, with our make do culture, they made do with what they with what they could find. But that's why a lot of it, in terms of that's why the West Indian identity is different to the West Indian UK identity,
Yeah.
because a lot of us had to make do.
Yeah.
It wasn't available, it just was not there.
Yeah.
And so it's so much more than just, I hate it when people say, oh, it's just food, you should just be grateful. It's not ungrateful, it's actually guilt, because then you've got this food that you can't use, you won't eat, and it's just looking at you in the cupboard and wasting away.
Yeah.
It's literally decomposing as it's in front of you because you won't eat it,
Yeah.
because you don't recognize it. And yeah, we're so grateful for the services that we have, and yes, we have always made do, but at what point does make do start chipping away at who you are?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as part of all of that, perhaps you want to just share the story about there's two ladies that I delivered to that are part of your church. And I know that they actually called you and you had conversations about all of that, and they talked about how important that was in kind of their state of care, if you like, as being two very well, they're elderly, but they're still mentally very sharp and very bright, even if physically they're not that great. And they've had to kind of readjust their lives. Perhaps you just want to just share those stories, because I actually thought they were quite powerful as a demonstration of the state of care.
Well, I had a call. I'll just share one because I could go on forever with the amount of texts and calls I've had from Miss Enid and Miss Felix.
Yeah.
And even Marie.
Well, yeah.
But Miss Enid called me one Saturday or Sunday, and she was saying, I didn't know Sherril was your mother. This is wonderful. What she's doing is wonderful. And what it transpires is, for years, so Miss Enid is a 90-year-old woman, very fit, very healthy, but very vulnerable at this time, exceptionally vulnerable at this time. And ever since she'd moved to this part of the UK, she had always gone to this particular shop for food, and it was extortionate, and there was limited availability for it. And she actually called me and said, what your mother is doing is a wonderful thing. I really appreciate it, because now she can eat the food that she wanted to eat. She was actually putting on weight rather than losing it. And which made her laugh. She's like, yeah, put on weight. So you know, but the joy in her voice at just being able to not only have her shopping, so to cook for herself the food that she likes is a big deal at 90 years old when you're stuck at home with no one around you, right? But equally, having good quality food already prepped and brought to her made a massive difference. It meant that the fear was gone. So the fear of, am I going to be able to get this food? What am I going to eat? Gone. You know, little things like she could plan. So one of the things she said to me is, oh, I don't have to go to the shop today because your mommy go and bring me some food little later and the shopping coming. Just the elation in her voice that was no longer a concern. It was something that she didn't have to worry about. It was something she didn't have to think about. Sorry, Joseph, babe. Sorry. She didn't have to worry about. She didn't have to think about anymore. You know, it made a massive deal in her life. And you know, particularly for people like Miss Felix, who are their mobility can be a challenge at times, it's an even bigger blessing, and overcome so many obstacles that were limited just because she couldn't do it herself, you know. But just I suppose the best way to describe it is the relief in their voices.
A word that's not used that often. Yeah, the relief of it all.
The relief, the sudden thought of, I can relax a little bit. I can enjoy the time, you know, this additional time that I've gained, you know. I don't have to worry and fret.
Yeah. And I suppose the point of all of that really is the fact that people are doing their online shopping, and they can do their click and collect from your Marks and from your Morrisons and your Sainsbury's and your Tesco's and all of that kind of
Exactly.
stuff. But the bottom line is, in terms of our food, after so many years, it is still not on the shelves where you can actually do your online whatever and actually have the thing delivered like
Mhm.
anybody else and everything else.
Or even worse, and this is my personal experience, so I'm not going to name the supermarket, but you guys can guess. I think I must have ordered yam. What was it I ordered? I ordered yam, and I ordered okra and some other stuff in the fresh section from
Mm,
this particular supermarket. By the time they reached my house, one, the quality was absolutely rubbish.
mm.
And also, whoever picked them didn't know what to look for in terms of ripeness and whether it was well. So you end up with one mash up, crooked, smush up okra that don't even look like okra anymore, and a yam that looked more like a potato than a yam. Yeah. And tasted more like a potato than a yam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so you just end up not buying it. And the other thing is, it's extortionate.
And
The
yeah,
amount of money I paid for a yam potato just upset me. Okay? It just upset me. I can't lie. I got a little emotional.
yam potato. That'll be a new one. We'll have to put that on the list. We'll have to put that on the
You
list.
know what I mean? To the point
Absolutely.
where my husband's like, no, buy it again. You know?
Wasting my money. So as we've talked about, kind of how you felt about
Mhm,
the
mhm.
the uh the the nutritional side of things and our
Yeah.
relationship and kind of looking at care for me in terms of times to come. um what
Mhm.
are your what are your views on the future really, and what needs to be done, what you think our priorities needs to be as New Gen Care in terms of what it is that we're doing,
Oh,
and actually what should your peers, so you as a 30 something young woman with 3 babies and a mother that's clearly is your mother that's getting on a bit, and there's lots of others getting on a bit, from your perspective.
mature. Adrian, tell me mature.
Maturing. I am mature, definitely maturing. So from that perspective, what do you think the priorities needs to be in terms of achieving our strap line, really, our mission, I should say, the mission and vision, which is about changing the landscape of care for the elders. From your perspective, what do you think we should be doing, and what sort of time scale?
Oh, I don't really know to time scale, because we are living in such an uncertain times. There are things that are accelerating
Yeah.
and there are things that are decelerating.
Mm,
Um, but for me, my generation, our priorities need to be us. Our priorities need to be us. And I don't just mean us in the sense of us as a family, us as a community, and how we provide that. Um, we certainly, one of the amazing things I would love to see New Gen do in the future is create a social hub. So within our community, obviously we have, community centers and, knitting clubs and the church, because we love the church.
mm,
But a community hub where it's not just the elderly that go, but maybe they go with their grandkids,
mm,
where their children can go and ask questions about wills, power of attorney, um, guardianship, all those kinds of things. How do I spot my mum deteriorating if she doesn't tell me?
mm,
Those kinds of things. I would love to see New Gen be at the center of creating something like that.
mm.
Um, I I want I would love for New Gen to be that go-to place when people think of safe care.
Yeah.
Safe care for our elders. That's where I would love to go. To the point where, you know what, we all our places are filled this year, you know, but we're building one next, you know, in the coming years, so there's spaces you could be on, whatever. But to have New Gen be that place where people can go and ask those scary questions, where they can signpost people to, look, do this training for your staff, and your staff will be better. And not just better just for the Black community, but better for anybody they come into contact with.
Yeah.
Because they've now considered these are individual. They're not just a generic person where we're going to teach you how to wash them, how to comb their hair, how to do this, that, and the third, but actually how to treat them with dignity, to treat them as an individual with their own background and culture, and how to treat them in a way that gives them the support that they need, but allows them to maintain what they're currently capable of doing. Because I see it a lot in care where people start doing everything for this person and then they deteriorate really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then Vanessa's actually asked a question here. You can probably see it on the screen. What advice would you give youngsters in regard to that? What I mean, I know that in terms of you and I, we've talked about many of these things already. A lot of time, for, you know, as you've already said, the reasons for that. But what advice would you give them, and what can they do in terms of improving things for their own elders, but the elders in general? From your perspective, what needs to be going on? How do they have those conversations and approach those conversations?
It's an interesting one, because obviously everybody's relationship's different. So how I can just say, Mummy, I'll go in the attic unless you tell me different. Some people may not have that same kind of relationship. But I would encourage people who are in my generation to just be brave, just be bold, because it is so much better to have these conversations now than when you're forced into a situation where you can no longer have those conversations with somebody you care about in a meaningful way. So it could be as simple as saying, you know, let's say you see your mum struggling, or she's hurt her hip or something, or, you know, you've recently known she's lost weight. You know, Mum, have you lost weight? Is this something you're trying to do? You know, what's going on? Just look for those key things, those key indicators, whether it's the immediate things that come to mind is, you know, are they suddenly not moving about as much? Are you suddenly seeing that maybe they've gone from living in the whole of their house to just their bedroom and the living room? You know, that could be an indicator. Things like all of a sudden, you know, maybe they're not able, you know, we'd call it in the clinical sense, you know, low self-care. Maybe they've gone from putting their lippy on to not even washing their face properly. You know, that walk that suddenly becomes a shuffle, you know, and just identifying and really taking the time to look out for our elders makes a big difference, and starting those conversations there. Or even just saying, you know what, Mom, I'm writing my own will to make sure I'm taking care of my kids and children. What have you got in place, and can I help you? You know, just those types of things I would really encourage people to do, and support things like this, because if we don't support things like this, we are going to be making exactly the same decision for our elders now that our elders have had to make for theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want my children to be thinking about, oh gosh, is this place going to take mum and dad?
Yeah.
You know, I don't want my children to be thinking about, "Ugh, is my mum ever going to eat ackee and saltfish again?" Because I would find that devastating. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No,
You
I can
know,
for you.
anyhow, they told me, "Oh, we're having fish and chips tonight." Great. Where's my ackee and saltfish? You know? Um,
Yeah.
so just having that in the background, I mean, I'm aware that, things are much better than they were.
Mm,
Um, but our elders deserve so much better than they're getting. They really do.
mm, they do.
Little things like, you know, the story I heard when the old lady had her head shaved because it was easier to manage. Well, no, it's just as easy for you to take some of her money that
Mm,
you're using to shave her head to pay a hairdresser, a
yeah.
mobile hairdresser to come and do her hair.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very, very, but it's things like that that people don't even think about.
Mm,
Um, and supporting things like New Gen, particularly New Gen with the training, means that it's not just, it doesn't have to be, you can only be sent to this home. Because
mm,
again, if we're talking about someone who lives in Birmingham, let's say the home's based in Birmingham, and we're talking about someone who's up in Liverpool,
mm.
relocating them is huge.
It's
But
massive.
if we can but if we can train the people who are already in Liverpool, in Manchester, wherever else, to
Mm,
deliver better care,
mm. Makes all the difference.
then
It does make all
exactly.
the difference, yeah. We're coming to the end of our time. The last hour has just kind of flown by, really, as it always
Just a
does for
bit.
you and I, because we normally talk in hours and it ends up being days, doesn't it? The whole day
Yeah.
having a conversation. So, is there,
Time's too long.
in terms of people who are kind of listening in or watching you and I, if you've got any questions that you want to kind of put in the comment section,
Box
feel free to
below.
do so and ask any questions now that you might want Panama to ask or myself to ask. And I suppose finally, Panama, do you have any pearls of wisdom about how to deal with old mothers and mature mothers?
Thanks, Adrian.
In
Lock
terms
them
of
up, kick them
taking
under the
care of
stairs.
themselves,
Nobody take them out.
or questions that they should be asking their children about, helping them doing whatever. I mean, do you have any pearls of wisdom that you want to share with the world on?
On a serious note, it would just be have those conversations.
Mm,
Please have those conversations now.
mm,
Because as time goes on, if heaven forbid something does happen, and at that point, you are really going to wish you'd had those conversations. You are really going to wish you'd have taken those actions.
yeah.
Um, we you don't want your mum or your dad to struggle in their dotage or be silently dismantled
Mm,
in their dotage. That's
yeah.
Nobody wants that.
Mm,
And so I would really, really encourage people just to have that conversation with your parents. Just ask them, what do you want? Even if it just starts as, what do you want me to do?
mm,
What would you like me to do? How do you want me to take care of you?
mm,
I know it's not always feasible, like I said, for people to necessarily get exactly what they want. But at least if you have the conversation, you have the starting point and you can make provision for that future in mind, whether it's the writing of wills, whether it's okay, this is what I want my care to look like,
mm,
whether it's I'd prefer to go in a home rather than stay with you guys, or I want to stay locally rather than relocate,
mm.
or I just want to be with you guys,
Yeah.
in the attic. We will wave happily at the attic window as we slide the food underneath the little grill.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, just yeah, exactly. Angela just really put it so well. Communication is the key, and just make sure it's documented.
Absolutely. You're so right, Ange. You're very right. Okay, well I think probably our hour is up really in terms of us
Yeah.
having a conversation. Yeah. And I thank you for taking the time, and I thank Joseph for being such a beautifully well-behaved boy. Call to action is please share this video with everybody, and have conversations with your loved ones, and just help everybody to help each other to you know, make this a better place for all of us and our elders. And so join the New Gen Facebook page or the State of Care for our Black Elders page, and let's just get the word out there and make things better. And if you can also follow us on all the other social medias as well, in terms of Instagram and LinkedIn and you know, all that kind of stuff. And you know, we're always putting information out there, so please, as my business partners just put up there, please have those conversations with your elders sooner rather than later, because quite frankly, later makes things very, very challenging, and actually ends up sort of being the catalyst for a quicker demise for some of our elders. Yeah. So I will say to you, ta-ra, until the next time.
Like, follow. I was going to say subscribe, but yeah, subscribe.
And bye to my sister. I think she's still on there somewhere, Lorraine, who's over there in the States, and Oni, I don't know whether they're still there actually, they may well have gone, but they've actually tuned in from the States, and are basically saying that things are much the same over there in Jamaica. Yeah, not Jamaica, in America.
The States.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks very much, people. Bye. Bye, baby.
Bye.